because we think the most important thing is the conversation is about questions and answers about this thing. We expect from our peers ourselves to have the courage to accept and value ourselves in the way we are, and from our abilities, empower ourselves to defend our rights, being the protagonists of our struggles and our claims with the slogan, "Nothing about us without us." To do this, users and former users should get together to denounce violent models, organizing against abuse, building relationships of friendship, understanding and cooperation with people who have lived our own experience can be something regarding, and it also allows us to develop the supporting network that we need outside the institutional area to promote our well-being in the community. We want to reach people with a clear, simple, readable and understandable language. The thoughts of the others are part of the set of questions that we made ourselves from the outset. What rights do we have? What are our rights? How to know them and exercise them? Many of us didn't know them. Now we do. Because we have the right to know our rights, we invite you to read this manual of rights in mental health and join us in this path. While the view of the map is not much appreciated, we have the duty to inform society and institutions so that our voice is heard and respected. If we want this to change, now they can tell us we are mad, that we are mad for our rights. Thank you so much.
The initial section, which is probably for the people that was involved, is the most important part, this manifesto. But there are two other sections. The other is a model of informed consent that kind of forces the therapists to be open about all the negative outcomes that each medicine could have. And the other, there is something called the anticipated declaration of will. I don't know if that's the correct translation, but it basically says that in case that I have a crisis that doesn't allow me to make a decision, this will be my decision. So you anticipate that moment instead of anybody else taking the decision for you, being a doctor or a family member. So those are the two other aspects of the manual, because in Chile those are really critical things to work on. Yeah.
It's probably something like the advanced directive in the UK. Yeah, it's an advanced directive. The patient can really often just being used as tester, being used to see the results of what a medication would do to a person. We often, as I live myself, the experience of being in hospital, really often we actually tested in emotional responses as well. So we put under pressure when we're already in a vulnerable state, and this is reality, it happens all the time. And people don't recover really, but just need to come off the services they're receiving, because the service just push us in a more traumatic sort of field, and we don't want to be there. As you say, probably we have to take responsibility and manage how we are and find the ways to ask for help and get the help that we need, not the what's been purposely offered.
It's safeguarding human rights on wards.
Thank you for the invitation. It's my first meeting of the Friends of East End Reviews, and just want to say on behalf of DPAC Solidarity, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you tonight. Now, who here hasn't heard of Disabled People Against Cuts? Is there anyone who's not heard of us? Right, now we started on the 3rd of October 2010, actually in a car park. After we were we're in Birmingham for the march called the Disabled People's Protest, which was a huge march to oppose all the welfare cuts that the government were about to implement in 2010. And we started with 13 activists on the 3rd of October, and today we have an outreach of 50,000 people across the country and worldwide, 33 local DPAC groups, and our sister organisation is called Black Triangle Defence of Disability Rights in Scotland. That's our sister organisation. So we basically set up to oppose and fight back against the vicious and brutal attacks by David Cameron and Ian Duncan Smith on all the cuts that they're implementing. And I have to say, we're not a charity. We don't believe in charity model at all. Our motto is rights, not charity. So we believe in inclusion, equality, social justice, and we believe that we should be able to live independently as best as we can in the community with the right support. But we do not believe in what the charities are doing today. Many of them, you will see, are working with the government and are profiteering on the backs of disabled people from the government's agenda, which is the work programme, workfare, and are working with them behind closed doors, a lot of them a few years ago, on personal independence payments. And a great friend of ours, and Dave's here tonight, the Mental Health Resistance Network, done a lot of great work in getting Paul Farmer, the Chief Executive of Mind, away from being advisory to the government on the work capability assessment. Now, I'm sure you saw yesterday, the news broke about Stephen Carey. Now, Stephen was found fit for work in early 2010, and his was the first coroner's report link to him being found fit for work, he taking his own life around the WCA. And this is before the current government got in. Now, the government did not give that report to Professor Harrington when he committed his first review shortly after the election. Now, the DWP with the coroner report should have given that report to Professor Harrington. He did not. And yesterday, we found out that Chris Grayling, the former employment minister, hid the report that said that the work capability assessment put thousands of mental health claimants at risk. They knew that before they rolled the employment ESA out to all the rest of us who are on incapacity benefits, yeah? So they knew it was going to harm, it was going to cause distress, and they knew that it already caused someone to die. And they kept that hidden and rolled the programme out anyway. And I'm sure you've seen the devastating impact that sanctions have had on job seekers' allowance, and of course in the work-related activity group of employment and support allowance. Now, to date, we have seen 64% of claimants in the work-related activity group of employment and support allowance who have been sanctioned have a mental health condition. It is impacting on all of you severely. Now, we know the story about David Clapson, and I'm sure you've heard about it. David was a former soldier, and his mother was taken ill, and he became a carer. And then he needed to claim social security benefits to live. And David missed one appointment at the job centre. One. And they sanctioned him. Now, David had type 1 diabetes. And, you know, as a result of missing one appointment, his £71.70 JSA was stopped. He didn't have any money to put on his electricity card to keep his fridge going, so he could keep his insulin cool. And the coroner ruled that when David died, He had no food in his stomach and no money to put on his electric card. And 3 weeks after he was sanctioned, David died from diabetic ketoacidosis caused by severe lack of insulin. He was found with a pile of CVs next to his body. David is just one story. One. Now in the DWP handbook, it actually says that it's okay to sanction someone 2 weeks who've got a disability. It's all right with them. They can sanction someone, which means we have no money to eat, we have no money to heat our homes, we've got no money to live on. It's all right with them. And I can tell you that when we spoke to the UN a few weeks ago, they were horrified at the levels of sanctions that have been implemented to date. And in October 2012, and this is from United Union's figures, 2.2 million people from October 2012 to date have been sanctioned. 114,000 of that figure have been classed as having a disability, and in 2012, 120 disabled people were sanctioned for a total of 3 years. 3 years, no money. 3 years, no money. You know, I'd like to go onto the work capability assessment now. And you've heard the story of Michael O'Sullivan. Now, Michael took his own life in September 2013, and our sister organisation, Black Triangle, has done a lot of work highlighting Michael's case in Parliament and, you know, out in the media, and have supported his daughter Anne-Marie in the quest for justice. Michael's family have been torn apart by Michael's suicide. And I have to say that it wasn't the first time Michael went through the work capability assessment. Michael had severe depression. He went through it in 2012, found fit to work by Atos, tried to take his own life. And he fell through the cracks where he couldn't appeal. And Atos, the DWP, put him through it again. And he was found, his doctors, psychiatrists, everybody. He had overwhelming medical evidence to say that he was not fit for work. Had a history of suicide ideation and attempts. DWP and Atos ignored all of his medical evidence. Ignored it. And they found him fit for work. Shortly after the decision, Michael took his own life. He's no longer with us today. Michael, Stephen, and a lady called Julie Ward, also in this position, 3 coroner's reports that link their suicide to the fit for work decision. But we haven't seen any recompense in the work capability assessment being adjusted. And I'm sure you've seen the Mental Health Resistance Network's great court case for the judicial review. And DPAC supported the court case when I was in court over a 4-month period with them. And I remember the ruling that it placed mental health claimants at a substantial disadvantage because we can't describe how our illness impacts on us every day. We don't have words to tell a doctor, do we, half the time? Let alone tell a complete stranger how our life impacts on our health. We can't do that. And it discriminates against us. Court of law said that. What did IDS do? Ian Duncan Smith sent round a directive to the Department of Work and Pensions, said it's business as usual. He ignored the court ruling. He appealed. He lost. So last year, there was the fight for reasonable adjustments to implement the pilot so that when a claimant has a history of suicide ideation or attempts, Atos, now Maximus, and the DWP, throughout the WCA process, must get further medical evidence from psychiatrists and from doctors. The onus should be on them and not the claimant to say they're not fit for work. DWP haven't implemented that pilot. Said it's too expensive. And they're still fighting to get that pilot implemented. This, I have to say, is absolutely horrendous because, according to Ian Duncan-Smith in select committee hearings just recently in sanctions, you know what his response was? No one's impacted by the welfare reforms. That's his response. To people dying, to people being sanctioned, to people having no money, to people being homeless, food bank usage going through the roof. That's his response. And I have to say, you've heard about the UN. In 2012, we contacted the UN on the Conventions on the Rights of People with Disabilities using the optional protocol about the right to live independently, because the closure of the Independent Living Fund is harming ILF recipients from able to live independently in the community with the closure. And this government is the first government in the world to face an investigation by the UN using the Conventions for the Rights of People with Disabilities. And they've just finished their visit here in the country. Now, it wasn't just the ILF they were concerned about. They were concerned about the cuts on the impact of children, the impact of the cuts on women, and the impact of our ability for the right to work. Now, we saw on the day after the election, David Cameron capped the Access to Work budget. Now, this is a pot of money that allows disabled people with the right support, with reasonable adjustments, able to work in the workplace. David Cameron capped it. But there's more to come here, because I'm sure you've heard of CBT and improving access to psychological therapies, which are due to come out into the job centres. On the budget in March, George Osborne announced a £40 million project. Basically what he wants to do is roll IACT out into the job centres. And what he wants you to do is to take the treatment, forced treatment is what we call it, and if you're not complicit, they sanction you. So basically what we're seeing here is ideological policy. It's about criminalising the use of food banks, because Ian Duncan-Smith wants to put job centre advisors into food banks. So he wants to criminalise the use of food banks, criminalise homelessness. You've seen homeless people now getting fined, places like Croydon and places like that. And he wants to criminalise us accessing support. It's our fault that we're not working. It's our fault that, we have depression. It's our fault, according to them. It's our fault we're unemployed. So he then decides, well, working is good for us. So he brings in CBT and IACT into the job centres and will force us to take it. And if we don't, they stop our money. That's what this government are about. It is literally what their whole aim and agenda is a scorched earth policy agenda. It is about privatisation of the welfare state and our support services in the community, abolishing the welfare state completely, and whatever support there is, you'll be forced to be complicit to get it. And if you don't, you won't get it. That is what the government's agenda is. Now, we've seen in the media the horrific propaganda they're using against us. To them, we're scroungers, we're fraudsters, we're work shy. And we've seen that benefit fraud is actually 0.7%. It's very low. But you don't see that out in the media like Daily Mail and The Sun and The Express, do you? And you don't see that on Benefit Street. According to them, we all have saunas and flat screen TVs and have holidays in Jamaica. Well, don't know about, we all know, don't we? We can't afford to eat. We can't afford to heat our homes. And we'd rather not be on benefits at all. We'd love to be able to do a job that helps us and supports us. And you ask any of the low-paid workers who are needing housing benefit because of high rental costs, they want a job that pays them a decent living wage. That's all they ever want. But this government are about attacking trade union rights, attacking workers' pay and conditions, attacking us, turning one group of people against one another, blaming migrants, blaming disabled people. When in actually, in fact, what the whole agenda is smashing the welfare state to bits and breaking it all up. And I'm sure you've seen the recent announcements with cuts to tax credits. Now, in the House of Lords, the government were defeated on this, but you don't be complacent. You cannot be complacent with this government because it was a temporary delay, and the government are trying really hard to push this one through. So I'm going to say to you about this because I'm sure you've seen some of our actions. We believed one of the best ways to fight back was to be as visible out on the streets and show resistance to this government, being defiant, being unrepentant, and saying that we will fight for our rights. And I say to all of you here, we have a proud history of resistance and fighting back. I've been in hospital when I told a psychiatrist, no, I'm not going to be injected, you can put me to the ground, but when I come out of hospital I will speak out about the abuse you've committed to me, and I did. And we all have a voice, we all have a story, we all have a powerful story of how this government are impacting on us. And I say to you tonight, never, ever let them stop your voices. Never, ever let them gag you, whether it be in hospital, in a community mental health team, or with a doctor. You have a voice. You have rights. Stand up and make yourself be counted. Now, Ian Duncan Smith calls us disability extremists. Well, we have a message for him. We're not scroungers. We're disability extremists because we're damn proud to fight for our rights, and I know I'm proud to be a DPAC member for that. And I'll say to all of you, not everyone can occupy Parliament or block a road as what we've done, but there are thousands of ways to resist this government. So however you can resist this government, now is the time to fight back, now is the time to put political differences aside, and now is the time to say to Ian Duncan Smith, we're coming for you, we're going to get rid of you, and then we're going to build the society that we want to see where we can live how we choose to live. Thank you very much for having me.
And that was predominantly brought on by the Winterbourne View scandal, where several elderly people were abused and some died. That was a care facility. And I was very lucky to go to the Department of Health consultation, and one thing that was made very clear was that the Mental Health Code of Practice was to be made available to all patients and all carers that were on wards or care facilities. Now, the consultation closed on September the 15th last year. At the same time, in South London and Maudsley, which is the centre very much of European psychiatry, in fact the Western world, they put up what is now known as the 5 commitments. You know, 1, to be honest, 2, to be polite and kind, 3, not to be a shit, 4, not to waste your time, 5, to kill you slowly without you knowing it. So that was already published in September 2014. The consultation closed September the 15th, 2015, and it remained as government chit-chat up until January 2015. It went through Parliament on March the 16th, and then it became protocol on the 1st of April this year. So they either have no sense of humour or a sick sense of humour, because that's April Fool's Day. Now, I approached SLAM and said, well, I went to the consultation, and it said there that the Code of Practice is to be made available to all patients and carers. What have you done?
Oh, well, we've got this plan to put up this picture on with the 5 commitments.
So essentially their plan is to boil down a 482-page legal document which guarantees protection of human rights into 5 sentences. So that's where we are. Really, the whole thing about human rights is now, we're seeing a bland washing. And so what we have now is currently, if we can medicate you, we can guarantee your human rights. If we can't medicate you, you don't have them. So that's where we are in terms of the UK position.
Everybody should have the right to have their liberty determined in public. Nowhere have I ever seen a mental health tribunal be held in public, even when the patient wants it to be in public. I know this from personal experience. Personal friends of mine have had tribunals. I've said I've been more than happy to come along and support them. Every time they've been told they're not allowed to have me there. This, I think, is a clear breach of the Human Rights Act. And perhaps as a first question, I could ask if the speakers agree. But my main question is this. We speak of human rights. I think most of you will know, having remembered what I said a few meetings ago, that there's an organisation in this country, a business conglomerate called First Step Trust. This organisation makes millions in profits by using mentally ill people as unpaid labour. They used to pay them £3 a day, cut it to £2 a day. They're now paid nothing a day. They're pressurised to work in this organisation because, as in many cases, even with friends I know, the chair of the organisation is also their psychiatrist. Dr. Elliott is a leading psychiatrist at the Oxley's Mental Health Trust. He's also the chair of First Step Trust. And like the Victorian workhouses, this conglomerate pays no tax because it's registered itself as a charity. They're undercutting legitimate businesses that do pay the minimum wage and do pay taxes and do keep people in genuine employment. Thank you.
The issue of, in Chile, the issue of work inclusion, which means basically to give jobs to people, has become so important, like that is the solution to all the problems, that is like promoted as an excuse to really bad practices. Well, but I gave 700 places and jobs to 700 people, and that's enough. And that's one of the problems with prioritization, which one of the concepts that I was trying to make, because from time to time, different issues become like the solution to the problem, and like the only solution. And I think that access to work is sometimes promoted as the only solution to the issue, justifying a lot of abuse. And not seeing the full picture in a way, and the full person. To separate psychiatry from issues of social justice, because psychiatrists are not prepared to address these kind of issues, and mental health doesn't have anything to do with psychiatry. That's his point regarding the first comment.
Danny, I'm just interested in Latin America, maybe what kind of alternative, well, what approaches there are at the moment to working with people with mental health problems from the community itself, possibly within the indigenous communities, both in Chile and also Latin America, and just what's there. I mean, you talk about exporting this model that doesn't really work, but I'm wondering what's there kind of already and what kind of response, what are people doing?
The indigenous communities in Chile, they have a completely different approach to mental illness, which is much more related with your roots and your relation with the place that you were born, or your environment and the spirituality. And they basically diagnose them as diseases of the spirit, basically, that are related with your biography, etc. So they have developed approaches that are completely marginalized. So you won't see that in any official statement, supporting or endorsing or funding that. At the same time, Rodrigo's experience is related with the creation of grassroots groups from users and ex-users, where there is a nice mix of experts by experience and experts by professional formation, and trying to develop relations of equality and horizontality between these levels that seems to be so opposed or so different for some time. And each community will have their own way to produce like alternatives.
It's hard.
Hi. Back in the late 1980s, the government were trying to introduce some new mental health act legislation, which included legislation to enable them to enforce medication on people in the community that weren't actually detained under a section of the Mental Health Act through the use of legally imposed what they euphemistically call community, but really should be called compulsory treatment orders, by which people placed on these orders would be expected to attend to receive medication on a regular basis. And if they didn't attend for their medication and they were deemed to be not cooperating with their treatment regime, that would give the authorities the power to come around that person's house, break that person's door down, physically hold that person down in their own home, force medication on them in their own home, with very little legal rights around that. Now, there was a lot of controversy about the introduction of this legislation at the time. Organisations like Liberty, the civil rights organisation, and the liberal press were up in arms about it, and there was a lot of controversy, and the government backed off because of the controversy from introducing that in the direct mainstream legislation. But what they've done is they've sneaked it in through the back door, through regulatory processes. And because it's actually cheaper to medicate people in the community than it is to maintain hospital provision, what's happening now is anyone who's been under a section on more than one occasion, particularly if they've been on a Section 3, are very likely now to be placed on a compulsory treatment order when they leave hospital. And although you have got a right to appeal a compulsory treatment order, you only actually get to appeal it once a year. And as far as I'm aware, virtually no one has been placed on a compulsory treatment order has ever won an appeal to come off of it. Because basically when they put you on a compulsory treatment order, the argument they will use is that you are too vulnerable and at risk to not be on one of these orders and to have medication forced on you. That if you don't have medication forced on you, you will not cooperate, you will end up in crisis. Now, Mad Price's position on the orthodox psychiatric profession is it's actually not about caring for and looking after the needs of people with mental health difficulties. It's simply a tool of the capitalist system to contain and control people that might otherwise be disruptive to business as usual. And this is just an extension of that control. Now, as I said, back in the 1980s when compulsory treatment orders were first being mooted, there was a massive public outcry against it. It was featured in the media. Because of that outcry, the government had to back off. Now that it's in common usage, and I'm talking about extremely common usage, as far as I'm aware, mention was made in South London and Maudsley earlier on, who like to present themselves as being one of the most progressive, liberal, right-on mental health providers in the country. But services they run the services, mental health services in Lewisham. And there's very little ward space in Lewisham. There's only a couple of little small overcrowded wards in the Lewisham District Hospital. But there's a disproportionate amount of people in Lewisham on compulsory treatment orders. And the vast majority of those people are Afro-Caribbean people. And again, it's not mentioned in the media, it's not touched on, no political party raises it as a concern. Which to me goes to show that despite all of the money that's spent on charitable things like the Time to Change campaign, which appears to me to have eaten up a lot of public money and achieved very little, people with negative mental health labels are still very much third-class citizens in this community, if not less. Now, what was being spoken about with Paula earlier on is in mental health, the recovery model has become very much, the mantra. The recovery model came from mental health service users themselves, people saying that they didn't want to be condemned, to an indefinite, negative label, that people can recover, that it's possible for people to have recovery. So they've adopted the recovery model, and they've adopted, I think they call it recovery star, where you measure, your recovery against different measurable units. And it's become the common mantra now in mental health service providers that somehow going back to work is a key to recovery. But there's no mention about the quality of work that's involved there. And it's clear to me, I know of cases of people without mental health labels who've been through the work capability assessment process, been wrongly ruled fit for work, been made to go and claim job seekers allowance, been unable to secure employment because they haven't got an employment history, and whatever they say about, challenges to employers against about discrimination and disability. The reality is that employers still are discriminatory against disabled people, particularly with people with mental health labels. They didn't want to spend £2,000 or around about that figure to put me into a residential detox for 10 days. They're expecting me to provide my own support in the community. Now, if I had got people to support me, those people, if they'd had to give up work to support me, they wouldn't have got recompense for that. I've got people around me that do support me, but they've got commitments or problems of their own. They wouldn't have got any expenses money, and even if they've been out of pocket and their costs for looking after me, they would have got nothing. So the government would have got a service on the tube. I would have been put at risk. They don't care about what happens to me. I'm just another statistic in that respect. Now, the latest squeeze that came out before the election was and this was a knee-jerk thing to get voter response, because they know they could, by stirring up prejudice, they could get responses. Exactly the same way as they try to prejudice people against disabled people. They know that people resent the fact that there's people with drug and alcohol dependencies that are living on benefits. So what they're now trying to say is that they're going to, if people have got drug and alcohol dependency problems and they're claiming benefits, then they're going to try and force people into recovery. Now, anyone who's been through recovery, anyone who's had experience of recovery, anyone who works in the recovery services will tell you that that will never work. You cannot force someone into drug and alcohol recovery. The person's got to be committed to it, they've got to want to do it, they've got to have a feel strong link to do it. Given that they're already cutting resources, so that people like me who actively wanted to get into recovery were finding it difficult to get the resources we needed to get the recovery services we needed to get recovery. If they're going to force more people with dependencies on benefits into recovery services without increasing the level of resources to those services, that's going to mean people like me who want those services are going to find them increasingly difficult to get. What's going to be the consequence of cutting the benefits of people with drug and alcohol dependencies? Quite clearly, crime rates will go up. It's a no-brainer, it's obvious, isn't it? And then that's going to put an even more of a strain on the already overtaxed criminal justice system, which is already under-resourced. It's going to be more crime impacting on people at the poorer end of society and the community in terms of household robberies and muggings and things like that. It's going to mean that they're going to have to divert money that's currently going into recovery services into the criminal justice system, because you're going to end up having a lot of people being put into the criminal justice system that are going to be in need of immediate detox. So that's going to mean the only way that the average person will be able to get access to detox and recovery services will be to criminalise themselves. Which, is we're going to end up with a model like we've got in the States, where a great proportion of the population is in prison. These politicians that are making these proposals, as I say, they're doing it to get knee-jerk reactions. They think this is what they'll get voter support on. And they will, because people are small-minded. But these politicians, they're not deluding themselves. They know that this isn't going to work. They're fully aware that this isn't going to work as a way of saving them money. They're not interested in that. What they want to do is to promote prejudice, to divide communities, and to keep us all separated. So that's the real agenda behind it. Anyway, quite clearly, people need to take these issues up with their local politicians. You know, challenge. As I say, all the other political parties are jumping on this bandwagon and saying, yes, that's the way to go. But we need to be pointing out the impact that's going to have on all of us in society, not just people with those dependency issues that are going to be directly impacted, but the way that's going to then knock on impacts on other people in the community. Okay, thanks very much.
Time to Change campaign actually did have a goal. It was started in 2009, but in 2011, Vince Cable announced that the pharmaceutical industry was going to be used to relieve the UK's economy. The UK economy is dependency on financial services. So the government, through Professor Dame Sue Bailey, brought in Mind. Okay? And so they revamped the Time to Change. It's a time to change. We've got to do a bit of talking about the mental, haven't we? Because you need to go to the doctors now, don't you? And that led to the largest annual increase in requests for psychiatric prescriptions ever. That was last year, 2014. That is what they want. The whole thing, and of course, this is solidified in 2013 with the election of the chief executive of Mind, Paul Farmer, becoming a non-executive director of Maudsley International, expanding markets, as you talked about, real estate in places like Sri Lanka. Essentially the same model as what they did with smoking in the 90s. We want to stop it in the West, we're going to promote it in the third world. A lot of this is to do with business. I'm really glad you brought up 2006, because 2006 is when it all really changed. Because 2006 is when the South London Maudsley, with King's College and King's Health Partners, effectively almost became a private company. It was the beginning of the beginning, okay? Because the Labour government made 44% of all NHS business legally bound to the private sector. This last government, the coalition, doubled that up to 88%, okay? The Maudsley Hospital became then, it was SLAM NHS Foundation Trust in 1999 when it was established. In 2006, it became a foundation trust. Now, when they become foundation trusts, they're not beholden to any laws. They're outside of the system. And this is the business model. Let me think, there's one more thing I wanted to add, but I've forgotten it. But yeah, that Time to Change thing, pretty much, you know, if you take the big mental health charities, Mind, Rethink, Together, Mental Health Foundation, between them, they take in about 120 million a year. And now they're all on the side of pharma, of the pharmacies. They were anyway, but now they've completely moved across. And the thing about the UK at the moment, the government's attitude to the pharmaceutical industry is only 50% of the UK adult population, only 50% is on prescribed medication. That means there's a whole untapped market in the other 50%. So we're going to get to a point now where the only people who are sick in our society are the ones who are not on pills, not the ones who are medicated. And so when you have things like the foundation of MedCity London on April the 8th last year, check their website, MedCity London, okay? Check the South London and Maudsley board meeting minutes, okay? It's a golden triangle of opportunity between Oxford, Cambridge and the South East. Because in the South East, we have a genetically diverse population of 8 million, all with complex health issues. And so we want to create a powerhouse in the life sciences cluster, not the health cluster, the life sciences cluster. So we are moving from George Orwell's 1984, slam bang, into Huxley's brave new 1948, because Orwell was not writing about the future, okay? He was writing about 1948, and he decided not to frighten the proles and change the number around. Brown has completely accepted Blair's model of the third sector, okay? And now they are using the third sector as a means to disband the welfare state. They're moving it into the voluntariness sector. Apparently these people volunteer. I'm sorry, no, these chief executives are on a lot of money. A lot of them start on about 18 to 20 grand. There's nothing voluntary about these trauma vampires, which is what I call them. Camden Council 3 weeks ago announced that they are wholesale getting rid of loads of social care responsibilities, and they're giving 7-year contracts out to the charitable sector. Now this is very dangerous because the charitable sector are not under the Freedom of Information Act. So if someone harms you, damages you, kills you, you can't take them to court because you can't get any information about you in regards to them. And this is a way of, you know, killing them softly.
As a user of any service you use, you have a right to comment on the service you use and the services that it contracts out with and has dealings with. So I would advocate that if anyone isn't a user of any service, that they should take an active role in participating in decision making in that service. And if they don't agree with policies that their services are pursuing as far as engagement with other services or any other sort of area of policy decision making, they should seek to get involved in you know, changing those policies or raising concerns about those policies. And if they can't get the organisation to agree to change policies where they're acting in ways that are not in the best interest of the use of the service, that they should then flag up those concerns to other publicly concerned people with a concern about those service provision. You know, I think the one of the difficulties we have is we live in a society where people are expected to be passive consumers in every aspect of their life. You know, and I would say that on any area that you get involved in your life, you know, I'm just speaking, this is my philosophy of life, I'm an anarchist, that you should seek to get involved and have control and have a voice in any area of life that you get involved in and any services you have to use.
We did a hell of a lot of work in exposing Atos's reputation worldwide. Now, who has a contract with Vodafone? They're owned by Atos. Santander, owned by Atos. EDF Energy, owned by Atos. Worldline, you do online banking. Atos own the software. Smart meters in homes, it's called WellGrid. Atos own the software. The NHS consultant desktop program, when the doctors type in notes on the computer in their offices, Atos own the software. When the GP types in notes about you at the GP surgery, they own the software. Yeah? There are thousands of ways you can expose the companies. One of the best ways is to stand outside the offices who are profiteering on the backs of all of you and say, no more. We're going to drive you out of business. We're going to drive your profits down. We're going to make you so toxic, we're going to trash your reputation. Not only did we drive Atos out of the work capability assessment contract, we drove their share prices down. What matters to them is money. So when you've got businesses involved in the work programme and charities, because we should be outside Minds HQ, voicing disgust about their complicit nature in being involved in all of the welfare reforms, that they're still having the advisory panels and everything, we should say no. And regarding your earlier question, he could have had all the support in the world. Could have. He could have had drop-in centres, day centre programmes, what have you. We'll never know. Sad what happened. Really, really sad. But you can have all the support in the world and you'll never stop somebody doing something like that. It's just like saying you can stop someone from killing themselves. You can give everyone the support you can give them. And unfortunately that outcome can still happen. Because I remember a few months ago, a few years ago actually, my friend had a hell of a lot of support. But I remember going with her to the doctors and they refused to help her, and I had to listen to her die on the phone. She took her own life and jumped in front of a train. And I couldn't do anything about it. And I still hear her screams in my sleep. But the thing is, what I'd say to you, one of the best ways to fight the fear is take the control back. And we do that with the actions we do on the street, with our roadblocks, with our occupations, and exposing the companies that are involved in workfare, in the work programme, who are profiteering on our misery. We've got to say to these guys enough and drive them out, because they're involved in being complicit in the privatisation of our entire welfare state, our NHS, and we've got to stand up to them and say, we're going to get shot at you.
And Etonian Jake's a practical joke. Osborne, Cameron and Himmler Smith, degenerate Norman dependents of Brit, Saxon slaves. No gods, no masters, but the labouring poor. An abomination of Trotskyites, with the humanity of a firing squad. And in a club World War III, over a glass of sherry, and a diabolical English police state.
Mud fry.